Hello and welcome. I am Dr. Joanne Lasowski, journalism educator and author, and we are here to discuss issues of importance to the South Caucasus. With me today, former ambassador to Azerbaijan and Bosnia in the 1990s, Ambassador Richard Kauzlarich. He is distinguished visiting professor at the Scar School of Policy and Government at George Mason University. Welcome, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you very much. Getting ready for our next school year, so the calendar is going by quickly.
Well, and lots of things are happening.
Yes, indeed.
Last week, Russia had several rounds of talks with the West, with the US, with NATO, to OSCE, but these talks resulted in no real apparent breakthroughs. One specific demand from Russia was that NATO expansion discussions regarding former Soviet nations must be decided by Russia. And as of now, no former Soviet countries may join NATO, according to the Russian demands. You've been ambassador to one of these former Soviet nations and have been following these issues surrounding these countries for more than 30 years, since the breakup of the Soviet Union. Do you recall any time during that past when Russia made such demands that these countries must remain under Russian influence?
Well, it's been a story that even goes back further than that. I was Deputy Assistant Secretary in the European Bureau when the former Soviet Union, the Warsaw Pact, were dismantled by their own choice. And Russia has argued that during the Bush 41 administration that the United States committed that there would be no expansion of NATO to Russia's border. Well, I'm sorry, that simply is not true. There was never any agreement. NATO's door has always been open to countries who otherwise are qualified to join the alliance, and this was reiterated for Ukraine and Georgia at the NATO summit in Bucharest in 2008. Another event that I was involved in some of the preparations for, so I understand what went on there. So no, we've never accepted this. In a sense, it's not something new. The Russians have asserted this all along, and we have been equally firm. And it appears both in our discussions, bilateral discussions with Russia, as well as those in Brussels with NATO, that point was reinforced. What I find interesting in all of this otherwise sad situation that Russia has created in terms of the increased tensions is that the very countries it does not want to join NATO are thinking about joining NATO. If the strategy, and I'm not sure I know what the strategy was, but if the strategy was to put pressure on countries who are outside the alliance not to join, I think it's had the counter impact.
But how is it even possible for Russia to expect these demands be met? These countries have developed their own bilateral relations with other nations and other states. What does Russia expect to make from these demands?
Well, it's hard to get inside the mind of Vladimir Putin, but there are some things that he's said in the past and repeated over time that I think are bear recalling. First, he said that the collapse of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical disaster of the 20th century. I think a lot of what we're seeing today, Ukraine, Belarus, the South Caucasus, and even some aspects of Kazakhstan and the CSTO intervention there, are reinforcing that view that Putin has that whether it's to recreate the USSR or recreate a system where Moscow determines foreign policy priorities, relationships for all these countries. That's one message that I think is out there behind that. The second one, and Putin said this a decade ago, that or this was actually former Foreign Minister Kauzlarich said this about Putin a decade ago, that for Putin the Cold War never ended. And I think if you look at the pattern of Russian behavior, even doubled down from what it was during the worst days of the Cold War, it's a reflection of his view that Russia is in permanent conflict with the United States and with the West as seen through NATO. So those are two things that I think we really have to bear in mind. The idea that for Putin, the USSR is not a thing of the past; it's a thing of the present, maybe in a different form, and also the intent to maintain a permanent conflict with the U.S. and the West, as long as the U.S. doesn't give in. And it's not just on this one point. I mean, the U.S. could say tomorrow, we're not going to welcome any new members of NATO, and Putin wouldn't be satisfied. That's not what this is about.
Now, this year marks the 100th anniversary of the creation of the USSR. Could that be the impetus that is pushing him so quickly to make this happen?
That I don't know. As I said, it's hard to get inside the mind of Putin, but he's convinced himself that he has an advantage now that he has to exploit. It could be because he's worried that things really aren't moving in his direction or Russia's direction on a whole range of issues. I don't know. All I can say is, this is not a well thought through rational policy choice that's based on reality. It's a reality that he created. It's a crisis that he created. It didn't start just this year. He invaded Crimea. He's invaded Donbass. He's created the situation in Belarus that has made the oppression of the Belarus people and the rejection of democratic processes there possible. The CSTO intervention in Kazakhstan, again, his choice. What that means, I think we're still waiting to see. But all of this is, part of a picture that he's playing out. He's the producer. He's the director. He's the person who's determining all of this. It's not a reaction to somehow the United States, invading Ukraine, causing the Ukrainians to create a crisis with Russia. It's the other way around.
So you mentioned Kazakhstan, and that happened in the past weeks and reportedly left 225 people dead, thousands wounded, 10,000 in jail. And you mentioned the Collective Security Agreement Organization sent troops in to restore stability. And this was the first time that the CSAO has sent troops anywhere. Might this set a precedent for Russian troops going to other countries and suppressing public uprisings?
Well, I think it could, particularly among those countries that are members of the CSTO itself. So, one could imagine a situation in one of the other member states, I don't know, Kyrgyzstan, or asking for CSTO membership. It gives our intervention. It does give an excuse for Russia to operate again, more like it did as Moscow dictated developments during the Soviet period, to try to do the same now. I think it's more complicated. I think it was really quite unfortunate first that the CSTO was invited in, but it took place while Armenia was chair of the organization. And so you had this very strange situation where Armenian troops were part of an operation in Kazakhstan. And I think that, that made a lot of people in Yerevan very uncomfortable just because of the precedent. I would also think that, and I've seen a few references over the last couple of months to the possibility of Azerbaijan joining CSTO. I don't think there's going to be much enthusiasm for that now because of what happened in Kazakhstan. I don't pretend to understand internal dynamics in Kazakhstan. The whole thing is inexplicable. There actually have been some pretty good analytical pieces in some of the press in Baku that I've read, some of the media outlets that have gone into quite deep detail about what might be, motivating all of this mysterious development that's going on there. But I think the fact that so many people were killed as a result of this has really sobered people about what kinds of pressures a lot of regimes are facing now, and where there may be vulnerabilities to regime survival. And so that's, that I think has got a lot of people's attention. I just hope, that Kazakhstan can resume a path of, more stability, but, the amount of violence and the numbers of deaths and the still uncertain internal situation politically in Kazakhstan, I think, has to be a concern. I don't think Russia created this situation, unlike, with with Ukraine. I don't think Russia has an interest in yet another problem on its borders right now. But I think they felt they had to act and act decisively. But they realized too the blowback that was being created by the way this took place. And so I think I had assumed that the CSTO force would stay for a longer period. Now it appears that some elements of it, at least, I don't know if all are being withdrawn, but this was not a well thought through operation, and I think some of the consequences have not been in Russia's interest.
Well, and I'm sure you've heard that President Tokayev has claimed that there were 20,000 foreign terrorists involved in these uprisings. Could this now serve as a catalyst for Russian intervention?
Well, I think that was one of the justifications that people used. For me, I'm not a Kazakh watcher, but it's unimaginable that for a state that has, throughout the Nazarbayev period, been very authoritarian, security services controlled Kazakhstan very closely, that you could get 20,000 terrorists in the country in a position to be able to be in violence. It just there's something missing here. That is not to say, however, that there weren't extremists, including Islamic extremists, who may, over the last decades, been in Iraq or Syria or Afghanistan and have come home and may be in a position to cause problems. But 20,000 just, that just doesn't strike me as realistic, I guess. And there were also reports, and it was from the president himself, who said that well, people had gone into the morgues in Almaty or wherever it was and shaved off the beards of bodies of terrorists who had been killed. You know, again, this is just very very bizarre for people who, like me, who don't understand kind of the internal dynamics. So yes, there may have been an element of Islamic extremists in Kazakhstan, but 20,000 just doesn't strike me as, and who would have it in their interest to have those kinds of people on the streets, you know, causing the violence they did.
Let's turn now to the Armenian-Azerbaijani conflict. In December, there was a meeting between the two sides in Brussels, and then just days before that meeting, Putin also brought the two together. Where do you think we are now? Do you think that the Russian and the European community are cooperating successfully to bring peace to this region?
I don't think they're cooperating. I think the Russians are trying everything they can to maintain what they view as control of this process. I thought it was interesting that the Armenian-Turkish discussions, which I think really, you know, this has kind of been an overlooked positive development in the region. The fact that the Turks and the Armenians are talking to each other. I can remember back, now it's been almost 2 decades ago, when there was that football diplomacy where the president of Turkey went to Yerevan to watch a football match, and that door closed very, very quickly. This, on the other hand, seems to have some endurance. But the thing that struck me was why did the meeting take place in Moscow? I mean, this is not, you know, the Armenians and Turkey have in the past, as I said, talked to each other and, you know, engaged directly. They don't need Russian mediation or supervision. But I think it's an example of Russia, again, trying to control the process. They do not want, despite their words, for that to develop. I think by the same token, they're trying to control Armenia Azerbaijan engagement, particularly over border issues. You know, all these stories about maps that the Russians have. Paul Goebel had a great article on his blog just a couple of days ago. It said there aren't any maps. I mean, there really aren't, and certainly not ones in Moscow. But you know, again, I think it's just an effort to try to control it. But to your question, I think the success of the meetings in Brussels, particularly the fact that the two leaders talked to each other directly without outside intervention, was really positive. I just hope that continue, because we're at the point where you don't need mediators. I mean, to be quite blunt about it, you don't need Russia, you don't need the US, you don't even need the EU. I mean, the two leaders have set the precedent of being able to sit down and talk. They know what the issues are: demarcation of border, transportation, protection of religious monuments, demining and unexploded ordnance. All of these things are out there. These are issues that the two countries, as sovereign independent states, should negotiate directly. And that I think the Russian involvement now is counterproductive in the sense of really pushing this process ahead, where peace is a normal discussion item between Armenia and Azerbaijan. I was a little worried that a couple weeks ago we had fighting that took place. It was relatively short-lived, and I was pleased to see the U.S. and others intervene in talking to the leadership to knock that down. But there's always the risk if we don't have a peace process that is active, continuous, and direct, the risk of fighting again is there.
Let's hope that. I mean, I think Russia feels that it's relative because of the Minsk group, and the Minsk group was successful with France and the U.S. and Russia, so they're trying to make the Minsk group again relevant in this conflict. But as you said, it's time for the mediators to step aside, even the Minsk group mediators.
Well, I've been at this long enough that I can remember before the Minsk group was created. And, Russia always felt that it, one, was in a privileged position because the whole idea, even during the Yeltsin years, of an era abroad where Russian interests predominated over those of any outside power. But they were never able unilaterally to do more than, very importantly, I will say, impose ceasefires when fighting got totally out of hand. But they were never, either because they weren't interested or not capable on their own to build a peace. And so the Minsk group was a way of doing that with other outside parties who have influence as well. I think there was a time, especially around the November War, where there was a narrative out there from everyone. The Minsk group failed. Diplomacy didn't work. That's why Azerbaijan had to invade. At the time, I said, well, if the Minsk group failed, you'd have to invent it again if you wanted to really build the basis for peace. And by that, I meant it had to be Russia plus the US and the EU. Turkey's role, always has been kind of in the background in the OSCE. I mean, they are a member of the Minsk group. I mean, not the tripartite leadership, but they are part of the Minsk group. It will be very interesting now if this Armenian-Turkish rapprochement continues. Then I would say, maybe it's time to bring Turkey into, it's not just the US, Russia, and France, but maybe the US, Russia, Turkey, and France, or the EU, however the Europeans decide to deal with that. But that's something that really wasn't thinkable until we began to see this engagement between Turkey and Armenia. I think that really is something that everyone should pay very, very close attention to encourage. I think that more than anything will help deal with this transportation issue, transportation link between Nakhchivan and Azerbaijan. I think if Turkey opens up with Armenia economically, that would be such a huge plus for the whole region. I mean, during my time in Azerbaijan, I visited Armenia several times, and I went to the border with Turkey, and I looked across the border and I saw all of this farmland in Turkey, and I thought, wouldn't it be amazing if you could open up the border and these farmers could trade their grain and other commodities in Armenia, and people could begin to build a more normal relationship in that respect. And I think that's something that not only should we encourage, but really go out of our way to promote, because it's going to be to everyone's interest. And I'm pleased up to this point that official Baku seems to be satisfied with how that relationship is going. I hope they continue to be that way, support Turkey, support the engagement with Armenia, and use that improved set of relations to address some of the other problems that they face.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Finally, in Azerbaijan, Ali Aliyev, the leader of Citizen and Development Party, was arrested and sentenced to prison in just a matter of hours. He was convicted in what is believed to be a politically motivated sham trial. What does this say about the human rights records in Azerbaijan?
Well, we've talked about this in the past, that the Baku regime feels that it can get away with increasing the repression, suppression of the media, free expression of views, human rights violations, running these sham trials. I mean, there are a number. This is just the most most recent and in many respects the most difficult situation. Excuse me, because of the because of the strange way that he was tried, if you will. But I think it's all the while that we have all this going on with people distracted about Russia, the regime in Baku is increasing the suppression of freedom of expression and human rights. I hope the U.S. is talking to Baku about this.
You mentioned what sort of started this whole thing, and the arrest took place over government criticism of a public interview that Ali Aliyev had, where he voiced concerns about a national disaster. Is there a chance that this is going to set a precedent that dissidents will not be able to voice their concerns in public for fear of being jailed?
Well, I think that if I were an Azerbaijani figure, I would be very concerned about what would happen if I did do an interview with any external media source. And I've not read the new media law, but from what people are saying, this is laying the basis for more repression along these lines. So I think there really is. This is the government sending a message. We're watching you. You think that you can say anything you want, because the people you're talking to are outside Azerbaijan. We're going to keep you from doing that. And I think it's just a sad chapter, another chapter in a continuing pattern of this. The one thing I take encouragement from is that there are more and more media sources, unfortunately outside of Azerbaijan, but that are covering developments. Over the last few months, I've seen more coverage of corruption, not just as a general problem, but naming names and going in quite frankly to a great detail that would embarrass, if not the government itself, certainly people in the elite. But I think this is probably a step too far now for the government, and they're going to be finding ways, I think, to use the new media law and, quite frankly, the lack of sustained attention from outside to government behavior on this. Ilham Aliyev was unhappy that he was not invited to this democracy summit that President Biden hosted last month. Well, there's a reason for that. And no, it's not because Biden's pro-Armenian. It's because Azerbaijan is not a democracy, and it proves that by doing things such as we've just been talking about, of suppressing the media, of sham judicial processes that put people in prison. And let's not forget, the hundreds of political prisoners who are still in prison, who should be released and are not. So, it's a point where Azerbaijan needs to turn in the right direction and allow human rights to be observed. And bring the country together to deal with both the challenges and opportunities that are ahead for Azerbaijan.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. I know you will continue to watch what's happening, and we will be continuing to ask you questions about what's happening in Azerbaijan.
Well, it's time. There is some good news out there. We should talk about it. I hope there will be more. So I look forward to it.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador.
Okay, thank you.